Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Historians episode here on Tales from the Wandering Scribe. I'm your host, Gabriel Garcia, otherwise known as the Wandering Quill and the Wandering Scribe. And we have another first time historian here on the channel. She is a historian, author, teacher, and content creator of her brand, Traditional Legends, where she focuses on folklore, myths, and legends worldwide. She holds a BA in European history and an MA in Antiquities and Classics, which is right around my alley. She loves sharing her knowledge of the lesser known aspects of history. And to tell us more about that and more, let's give a huge round of applause to Miss Brandy Williams. Brandy, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Well, thank you for having me.
Awesome. So before we dive into more about your background as well as your brand, Traditional Legends, is
Mhm.
there anything else you'd like to add about that before? Like any projects you've worked on, anything in particular?
Actually, I haven't been working on anything in particular. It really began as a blog site a couple of years ago after I got my MA. And we've extended into podcasts, we've extended into filming, just kind of going around the local area and looking into different folklore, myths, legends, and things like that.
Nice. So let's actually talk a little bit about your road to history and
hmm
myths, Brandy. So walk us through that. So how did that come about? Were you always fascinated with history and myths growing up, or did that come about later in life?
A little bit of both. I grew up in rural Florida, and I have to make a differentiation there because when people think Florida, they think Disney World, Miami, things like that. No, 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 no. I was from the swamps of Florida, which is
Mm,
a very different um, place altogether. It's a little more akin to Alabama and Georgia.
okay.
So, and when I was growing up, I actually knew the grandchildren and children of Civil War veterans. My grandparents were all born in 1899.
Whoa.
Yeah. So there's always been history. It's always been part of my life. And with my family, we've always been a little more like the Adams family than the Cleavers. So it's always been, they've both been aspects.
Nice. So growing up and then pursuing your uh, BAs and MAs in history, what was sort of like the aha moment that this was something that you wanted to not only just pursue for yourself, but also share it with the next generation of historians, as well as those who are interested in the lesser known aspects of history?
Well, it's really a funny story. Many years ago, my husband and I lived in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, where we had a museum based on ghost hunting.
Ooh, okay.
And we would actually take people out and conduct investigations, things like that. Our museum was based in a Civil War era home as well. And throughout this whole process, the time that we had the museum, I began researching not only the locations that we were investigating, but also the history of the house where we were located.
Mm-hmm.
And it went from there where I was asked to do, hey, find out the history of ghost hunting. Where did it begin? And I actually traced one of the earliest investigations to a narrative related by Pliny the Younger. And but the event that he talked about was actually even older. And when my husband saw my passion and my dedication to it, he says, "That's it. You're getting your degree in history." And he really started pushing me to do that, and that's what finally went. Okay, you win. I'll do it.
Nice. And so then now fast forward to now, of course, your brand Traditional Legends.
Yep.
When that started, what was sort of like the initial goal you had in mind with your brand, as well as the need you want to satisfy for prospective viewers who were interested in something like this?
Well, I really started it mostly as a blog spot. And it's because throughout my education, I started realizing there were certain myths, certain legends, things like that. There are common threads that are woven throughout history that everyone shares. You know, for example, there are vampire-like legends that span the width and breadth of history, and you
Hmm.
can find stories all around the globe. These are things that I started realizing we're not as different as we like to think we are
Right.
from one another, you know. And that was really my goal. One, to start taking away some of the fear of these
Mm.
stories and start looking at what does it mean culturally, because they also represent our fears, our hopes, our dreams, and those are things that we all have in common.
That is actually very true, and it actually is an interesting point. I'm sorry to look at. What are the cultural context to these myths? What was happening around that time? Like there are so many
Mm-hmm.
stories and accounts of, let's say, like the Spanish explorers who came into the New World, and there are reports of seeing giant bird monsters or these
Mm-hmm.
great creatures that would pluck men out of the sky from the stories they've heard of the indigenous people that they encountered. But what were they actually seeing? It was possibly just a standard bird that we know, but back
Right.
then, you have no idea. So it is really, really
Mm-hmm.
interesting. I like that where it gives context to these great myths. And when you began this blog and started doing research on like certain topics, what was
Mm-hmm.
the initial feedback and response like from friends and family? Positive, mix?
It was actually really, really positive. Here locally, there's a barbecue place that we would go to frequently. And one of the girls that works there, as soon as she found out what I did, she goes, "Oh my gosh, you're my favorite person now. That's it. I absolutely love you." You know, so they've really been very, very supportive.
Nice. And also, on that note, is there one review that stands out to you from like a subscriber to the blog who's like been really fascinated, someone you may have encountered on social media who you've interacted with, who's been like very, very supportive, who's like shouted you out to the interwebs?
Actually, it's really funny. A couple years ago, our town does a trunk or treat event every Halloween.
Ooh, okay.
It's right across the street at the funeral home, no less. And the first year we did it, there was a gentleman there dressed like Santa Claus, and I went, "Oh,
Okay.
that's it. I have to go meet this guy." And we have become really good friends. And it's so funny because he will message me at random times. One of the most recent ones, he goes, "Do you think hummingbirds are fairies? What's your view on this?" You know, so he's always, you know, really asking me these thought-provoking questions that kind of makes me go on these different routes.
Right. Nice. That is actually really, really awesome having those interactions. And now comes the first reflective question, Brandy,
Mhm,
which I'm sure you would definitely agree, being a content creator, an historian, an educator, it's not easy, especially in the field of history.
yeah.
For all historians, we all want the top tier jobs, like working like museums, government, some of like the
Right.
higher tier. It's not easy. It is very, very challenging, very, very difficult. And I talked
Mhm,
with a lot of historians about this, and it is kind of deflating because, you know, we are conditioned to look for those jobs, or if we don't
mhm,
get those higher tier jobs that we're interested in, the fallback is always, you know, education. Not to treat anyone who is in education. But what I'm just saying is that those options are, we're only
mhm,
taught those are the two things that we could use our history degree when in actuality,
mhm,
there's other aspects of it, but it doesn't get shared as much.
right.
So for you, Brandy,
Mhm.
through your journey and experiences, have you ever had moments of imposter syndrome? And if not, what has continued to discipline you to create the content that you are making because you are passionate about this?
I have had imposter syndrome so many times. I really have. And I think one of the things that really helped me out, and this goes back to when we had the museum, I knew what I was doing, but at the time I didn't have the degree, I didn't have the education behind me. But we had a gentleman, he was a professor from overseas. I believe he was from Sweden.
Hmm.
And he was actually doing a summer research project in Gettysburg. And he was really impressed with what I did. And I think that was kind of my light bulb moment that put myself in check to realize, oh, yeah, I am a historian. I know what I'm doing. I got this.
Nice. Yeah, I 100% agree. I have the same feeling like after I graduated from my master's program in San Francisco, and I was realizing, what am I going to do?
Yeah,
I don't want to go into education as my first choice. I do want
right.
to have that as an option, but I don't want it to be my first choice. So, what else am I interested in or passionate about? Writing. I love writing about history. I love writing
Mhm.
about all of that. And ultimately, that's what I'm doing in addition to doing videos, which that is something completely new. I was never into content creation. That came about just a year ago, though I did do audio interviews where people
Mhm.
did not see my face. You only heard my voice. And I did it
Right.
for 2 years. And then, of course, slowly moved away from that to now just do YouTube. And it is crazy, but
It's
there's so
fun.
many, it is fun. And there are
Yeah.
so many different aspects to it,
Mhm.
which actually now leads perfectly to the business side of being a historian, which I'm really interested in hearing your thoughts on, uh, Brandy. So again, going back to your bio, you are a historian, an author, teacher, and content creator. So
Yes.
that's a lot of titles. So
Yeah.
in the beginning, when you got your MA and you were fresh out of university, did you initially want to try your hand at like the top tier jobs that we said in the beginning, or because of your passion, what you were already interested in, did
Mhm.
you want to go the route as what I like to say, almost like the freelance or independent historian?
Well, first and foremost, when I first got my degree, I just wanted to sleep for about 2 months. That was
Yes.
my initial response. And then after that, the thing is, the town that I live in, it is it's between 1 and 2 miles, square miles. That's it. That
Wow.
it's very tiny. I think we have two traffic lights. Everybody knows everybody. And we are a good 45 minutes to an hour away from the next largest city. And so don't get me wrong, I would love to work in archives and things like that. That would be my absolute dream. But that's just not reasonable to do here.
Right.
And that's where I was really in a very lucky position that my husband made enough money, he could support both of us, and I could just really use my degree in whatever way that I wanted to. And that's really where I decided, you know what, I'm going to start writing blogs now about the fun side of history instead of the scholarly stuff that I did when I was in school, where I
Right.
had to investigate wars and things like that.
Definitely. You know what? Your temperament very much reminds me of another fellow historian, TK Nakamura. Shout out to her. She is an incredible person. She's historian that, well, she's from the US, but she moved to Japan, got married, and she's now a teacher in Japan, teaching Japanese history. And she
Ooh.
is so fun, so incredible. She has a persona for her podcast called For the Love of History, where she's almost like historian's hotline, where she has like a little earpiece, even though it's like, I think it's like a razor that she uses as like an earpiece
Mhm.
or a broken toothbrush. But oh my gosh, she is like so funny. You guys would actually hit it off very well. And everyone like in our audience like loves this kind of like different take on history, which leads to this discussion again, the audience. So for you, Brandy, when you began working on the blog and started creating the articles that you're passionate about, did you have an idea of the audience that you were gearing towards? Because I bring this up, it's like, from one author to another, we write stuff and create stuff because we enjoy it. But if we want to
Right.
share it with everyone else, we really have to consider, okay, who are we actually going to direct our efforts to? Those that are the history enthusiasts who have some aspect of history, or are we gearing towards those who are historians who have a good understanding of the source material?
I think I was just putting it out there for all the other spooky girls like me, so that they would understand more of the history behind these things that are being presented. It's like, okay, you're into witches and Wicca and things like this. Well, you know what? Let's talk about that for a minute. Let me show you what happened in Salem. What was the origins of that? Let's talk about what was really going on in Europe during the witch trials, so they get a little bit better idea, because there's a lot of misconceptions about
Right.
things.
Definitely, definitely. And also, when it comes to the presentation of history, I'm always fascinated of how, historians present history, because we always are inspired and trained by, our peers, our mentors. But we also, when it comes, writing about history, we're always inspired by either historical fiction authors or nonfiction books or other fellow historians. So for you, Brandy, who
Mhm.
are sort of like the historians or mentors and peers that really helped you come into your own as a historian in terms of like, public speaking, writing, as well as creating historical based content and content in general?
Well, I think more than having, people that I looked up to and things like that, I thought back a lot about the way history was presented to me growing up in
Right.
school. And it was rote memorization, it was wars, it was dates, it was, if you'll forgive me, it was the names of a bunch of old white men.
Names, dates,
Nothing.
and places.
Yeah, and I thought to when I got into college and I started hearing all these other stories, I went, wait a minute, people need to know this. They need to hear about it in a different way. And that's really what galvanized me to actually form my own voice, because I started looking at it. And I'm one of these people that when my kids are struggling in school, I'll say, okay, let's stop. Let's stop thinking about the proper way to do it. Roll it back. Let's have some fun with it. And once they
Right.
started having fun, man, they learned all kinds of stuff. It was great.
That is true. And I also think it's probably one of the biggest things, all my historians agree on that. That is probably like the biggest turn off in the field of history. Is like, we are conditioned to do like names, dates, and places, and that could turn people away
Oh, yeah.
from history. I had one person last month, Michael uh, Dogier. Hopefully,
Mm-hmm.
I'm pronouncing his last name right. But he even said that that's like 19 out of 10. That is the biggest like death sentence for people who love history. Is that we're
Mm-hmm.
conditioned to remember that stuff, but history is not names, dates, and places because history is constantly changing. It's
Mm-hmm.
constantly being updated. And that's the beautiful thing, because if it isn't being updated, if it isn't being challenged, then it's going to grow stale.
Mm-hmm.
And leading up to that, from one author to another, we always try to find out, who exactly are our readers. And I bring this up because, we always try to market for like a particular audience
Mm-hmm.
within, history, where it's like European history, American history, any aspects of like the sub history, but who exactly is the readers? Who are exactly the people who are viewing the content? Again, is it people who have no idea of history but are history enthusiasts, or is it the mainstream historian who has knowledge on this, who's been studying this for a long time? So for you, Brandy, looking at the people you probably have met on social media as well as in
Mhm.
person and stuff like that, do you have a good idea of who your readers are for your brand traditional legends and so forth?
I think actually my main audience is just mainstream, the everyday average person. And what's interesting, I've been noticing the analytics, and a lot of my viewership, a lot of my readership is overseas.
Same
Um,
here.
yeah, I wrote an article about the Strigoi of Romania, and oh my goodness, that is my most popular blog.
Really?
Hmm.
That is like your most popular blog.
Yeah, yeah.
That's incredible. I mean, almost like the same thing. Like my highest viewed video is actually with a historian from India, and currently she holds
Hmm.
the rank as like the most viewed episode on my channel, followed by my friend and fellow historian,
Hmm.
Mark Schneider, who is best known for portraying Napoleon and
Oh,
Marquis de Lafayette. And we actually had an interview for my other series, The Historian's Lounge, where he dressed up as Napoleon. And
that's
it was
great.
an interview of him as Napoleon discussing the film starring Joaquin Phoenix and whether or not it was accurate to his life. And that is the second most viewed episode. But it's funny. I have never done an episode like that. I called him, Your Excellency, Your Highness. It was the best.
That's
We were having so much fun. But that's the beautiful thing about, history. There are so many different aspects of it. But I definitely feel it's important to talk about, for people getting right out of college, there's almost like this idea that, oh, if you've been working on a thesis for a long time, because sometimes we do have to work on a thesis depending on where our
yeah.
interests are. And we believe that this thesis is like going to get us into the career we want. Not necessarily. And this is what I like to bring up using my author reviews, but it's the same thing in this case, which is the two paths. Do you want to be an historian, or do you want to be known as a historian? Because those are two very, very different goals. To be an historian is someone who is passionate about history and gives back to the discipline, who gives back to the scholarship to inspire the next generation of historians. To be known as a historian is an individual that is going out of his way or her way to, talk about their thesis, meet other historians, put the foot in the door. And not saying that this position is wrong. What I'm just saying is that we are conditioned to go down that first path because we
Hmm.
feel that that's going to be the most successful. But, and you probably may agree with this, Brandy, that for a first time historian that has no experience going into the higher tier fields, there's no guarantee that their debut, anything is going to be the start of their legacy. Sucks, but is
Yeah.
entirely true. Now, there are some exceptions. You have some historians whose first work gets them to the status where they are able to work at like the higher tier, like research, archival work, federal government, and stuff like that. But on the other side, you have historians who, push themselves so much that it's no longer fun. As one
Yeah.
person said, when your muse becomes your main source of income, it's gone. It's dead. And that is unfortunate, but it does sometimes happen. So for you, Randy, in your
Hmm.
opinion, how important is it for, historians getting right out of college to really understand that there is no guarantee that their debut, anything, whether it's paper, dissertation,
Yeah.
anything they've been working on in college that they are really passionate about and they know it off the back of their hand, it does not guarantee it's going to be the start of their legacy, but it should not deter them from
Hmm.
pursuing history if that is truly their passion.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, Here's one thing that I learned fresh out of college. I spent my time majoring in European history and antiquities and classics, but I live in America. So I didn't study American history, which means
Right.
my job market got even smaller. But the truth of the matter is, the more that I learn historically, the more I realize, holy snickerdoodles, there's so much more that I don't know. There's so much more out there to learn. And if you really think about it, there are documents and things like that that have yet to be digitized. So you would literally have to go to an archive and look and try to read that fine print. So there's still a lot that's unknown. And I think it's more important to just really pursue your passion, even though you're not necessarily going to get that top tier job.
Right, definitely. And also to add to that, grit also trumps talent. And what I mean is that doesn't matter if you are, good at public speaking or you're good at, record keeping or archival research. Just like an author, if you're not willing to go through the hurdles, the fires and the flames, low Dragon Force reference, everybody, then you may want to reevaluate your goals because that's the ultimate thing. What are your long-term goals, in the field of history, and also as an author too, especially if you want to be an historical fiction author or an historian that writes reference books that gets used by colleges or schools or it's in public libraries. It's not an easy job, but if you do understand the long-term goals and you reevaluate, okay, here's what I'm going to do, grit transforms into talent and it only gets better from there. Start off small and then work up because who knows, possibly your 10th project that you worked on or your 20th is probably going to get people's attention, and when that happens you can then say, hey, if you like this, you should see my journey and the other stuff I worked on because that is also interesting. And I also add to this, in the field of history, right outside your field just once to see, because you never know. Even if you are, just like me, classical antiquities, I also write a little bit on World War II, medieval history, and I love those aspects of history and other ones. You never know. And boom, that's another market you can really look into. Wouldn't you agree, Brandy?
Oh, absolutely. As a matter of fact, I was teaching American history, 1877 to the present. So I had to really shift. I had to take that on. But that offered me an opportunity to give my students a little something different.
Right. And it is really, really fascinating. So, all things we're saying, never sell
Yes.
yourself short. Don't put your eggs in one basket. Go out of your comfort zone. Even if it's something that you're not interested in, you never know. Something good come out of it. Um, and just always experiment. Just always try. And it also doesn't hurt to also connect. That is a huge thing in the historians field. Make connections with others because
Yes.
those people have other avenues for you to explore. So let's actually talk a little bit about that, Randy. So, for you as an historian, how important is it, would you say, is to make connections with others in the field, as well as reaching out to those who may not be in the same discipline, but they
Mhm.
also have different avenues that could help you and your own growth?
Oh, it's absolutely very important. I am of the mindset that you can't just look at history from the written documents. You have to work with archaeology, you have to work with
Right.
anthropology, because sometimes the written documents are missing. Sometimes there's this, for example, the Birka warrior. Okay. It was the grave of a warrior that was discovered by archaeologists. It was full of grave goods, two war horses, weaponry, things like this. Okay.
Mm.
Historians came along and they went, oh, that's a brave male warrior. Nobody bothered to do an osteological
I
examination.
know. I think I've heard this story. Yeah.
Yes. So many years later, they finally did an examination and they went, these are the remains of a woman. And suddenly the historians, instead of looking at the archaeology, instead of looking at the anthropology and what was customary for Viking age warriors at the time, they just went, oh, it's a woman who was buried with her husband's grave goods. And I'm going, no, 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 we need to A, B, C, D and work with these other disciplines.
Definitely. And that's honestly like, the biggest thing in history is that challenging, what we've always been perceived as truth. And that's always the good thing, but also it should be monitored respectfully because, yes, as the saying goes, history is written by the victors, but sometimes we have to reevaluate, okay, who those victors are in certain aspects of history. Because we know clearly, okay, this person doesn't need to be evaluated. We already, know everything about this one. But like the lesser known aspects of history, you really have to think, okay, well, what really happened? A case in point, there was one figure in Antiquities which I've always been fascinated, which was the kingdom of Kush in Lower Egypt and modern day Sudan. Now, for people who do not know what I'm talking about, go back to my interview with a fellow historian whose name escapes me, but she's in the Historians Lounge series. She wrote a book on the warrior women of Africa from the classics to the medieval age. There's one queen, Amonfretus. I probably butchered her name, but that's probably in my head how I remember it. And why I'm bringing her up is that she was probably the first woman ever to not only fight Rome during the reign of Augustus Caesar, she kicked them out. And as a testament to her will, she literally cut the head off the emperor. Not actually Augustus, because if she actually did that, that would have greatly changed the Roman Empire. But she cut off his head of a statue, symbolically saying, you're not ever coming to my kingdom ever again. You're not going to threaten my people. You are staying out. And since then, Augustus Caesar, we have this documented. Augustus Caesar wrote a treaty with Amonfretus stating, and I'm going to be paraphrasing, Rome will not enter your kingdom. And that deal was honored. And think about that. The Romans never usually honor any deal with anyone they deem a barbarian or someone beneath them. But they did it with not just someone who was what they viewed as a barbarian, they did it to a woman, a queen. And that is huge. And I've always been fascinated about other aspects of history, but it is very much important. So we kind of maybe got off a little bit of topic, but ultimately getting back into, connections and meeting with other people to tell us new things, it is really important. So for you, Brandy, who would you say are the people who have been by your side since the beginning? Obviously, of course, friends and family, and of course, your husband. But are there any other people you would like to name drop? Professors, other historians you've met on social media?
You know what? I will say this. Professor Leslie Kelly. She is actually the reason that I got my MA in Antiquities and Classics. I took a class under her in my undergraduate, and it was just one of the prerequisite classes, but she made it so interesting. I believe it was on ancient Greece.
Ooh, okay.
And it, at the time, it wasn't my cup of tea, but she made it so interesting and so amazing that I went, no, this is what I want to do for my master's. So I would have to say Leslie Kelly.
Awesome. Awesome. And then before we go into the final questions, I do want to hark back to, again, as you brought up, being a teacher as well as being an author. So how did the teacher aspect come about? And were you a little hesitant of how you would approach teaching history to students?
Oh my goodness, I was going crazy with my teaching assignment because one, I am trained in Antiquities and Classics, European history, and here I got the role for American history. And my class was actually mixed. I had 3 students who were still in high school,
Mm.
and then the rest of my students were college age. And,
Oh, okay.
going in, the first question I asked, the first day I went, so how many here actually like history? And of course, all my students just kind of looked at me, they groaned, they rolled their eyes, they put their heads on their desk. And I'm going, yeah, that's what I thought. And I asked them why. Their reason is the same reason that you and I just talked about. It's the same exact thing. It's wars, it's this, it doesn't relate to anything.
Right.
So I told my students, I'm like, don't worry, this is going to be completely different. And what I really chose to focus on, because I was given carte blanche. It was anything 1877 to the present, American history, you teach it. And I went, okie dokie. So I added in African American issues. I added in women. I even added in the fact that ufology really began to take off after World War II. And the reason I added that is because it was part of our culture. It was a
Yes.
direct result of the dropping of the bomb.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that I found really, really interesting, I've started utilizing AI in my classroom. So I typed into AI to give me a probable scenario if World War I had not happened, how would history have played out?
Mm.
And I gave this to my students, and I'm like, pick one thing out of this and discuss it in your discussion board, because that taught my students that yes, the past still is affecting us today.
That is actually really, really awesome. And actually very much reminds me of another guest I had, Professor Meredith Walker, who she said, and I quote, when I teach history, it's like taking a baseball bat to the face. It's gonna hurt, it's gonna be uncomfortable, but it's gonna happen. It's gonna be up in your face, because history, something we forgot to mention, history is not pretty. It
No.
is up close, it is gritty, it is messy, but there are other aspects which are fun and engaging, like food history, and how there was the great syrup disaster in I want to say like the late 1800s, early 1900s, and that is completely like, okay, like why is this important? We have a whole series on the History Channel, literally on the games that built America, food that built America,
Yeah.
the companies who built America, and you
Mm-hmm.
realize, holy mackerel, these things really, really revolutionized,
Oh
you
yeah.
know, history just in the last 100 years, even like
Mm-hmm.
150 years. Not even talking about like the founding of America,
Oh
but
yeah.
like late 1800s to now. It is really, really fascinating. And then actually, this leads to another discussion, which is now you being an author, Brandy. So,
Mm-hmm.
how did that aspect of you come about? Were you always passionate about writing, or did that come about later when you realized, okay, I'm now going to make this? I should really, hone in on my writing.
Well, I've always been really, really good at research. I'm just one of these people that if I think to myself, hey, I wonder where this started, I'm going to dig in. I'm just going to, and I'll go down the black hole, and I've done a lot of genealogical research, and there have been days where it's like hours have passed, and I look up and it's suddenly dark, and I went, uh-oh, I should have made dinner. And but the more I kept writing, what I was really doing through my college time, I was giving my husband my papers to proofread. And my husband, while he enjoys history, he's a techie person.
Ah.
It's computers, it's cryptocurrency, it's all that. So I'm giving him my papers, and he's looking at me, and he goes, "Brandy, you really need to put this in a book." It's him. He's pushy. He's pushy. He just kept pushing me. And then one day I was scrolling through Instagram, and I saw a publishing company that was looking for new authors, so I reached out.
Ooh.
And there went my first two books.
Awesome. And what are your two books that you would like to share with the viewers and listeners?
I have Phantom Vibrations, A History of Ghost Hunting, where I talk about it from antiquity all the way up to the present, how it's changed, and how different cultures looked at death, dying, and the afterlife, because it
Ooh.
really plays a part in how we view ghost hunting.
Right.
My other book is Trails of Blood, Legends of the Vampire. And
Ooh, nice.
again, I trace the vampire figure legend through history, and actually the first vampiric figure was the goddess Sekhmet, who was the daughter
Yes.
of Ra. So this isn't something new. This is an icon that has really transformed and still plays a part in culture throughout the world.
Definitely. And also one we would never consider the traits of being a vampire, or one we would consider in the vampire lore, because we always associate either Bram Stoker's Dracula,
Oh,
which is based
yes.
off Vlad Tepes of
Mhm.
Transylvania, or Nosferatu, or the Strigoi. But there are so many different aspects of the vampire myth and lore, which is fascinating, as well as other variations which have grown over the years. You have, in games specifically, you have like the higher vampires, which is like Dracula. You have vampiric beasts. In the case of
Mhm.
the Chupacabra, there are so many different aspects, but
Right.
that is really, really fascinating, which then leads into the last few questions.
Mhm.
So, for you, Brandy, looking back on everything that you've worked on up to this point in your life, have you ever gotten a sense of validation from other historians who have come across your work? And I bring this up because it's one thing to have, all of your knowledge and apply it to a passion that you're really dedicated towards, like your brand, traditional legend. It's another thing entirely when a fellow historian, comes across it, sees the work, and gives credit where credit is due.
As I said, the historian that I met several years ago that was from Sweden, but actually I've gotten more interest from other disciplines such as anthropologists,
Oh,
and
nice.
archaeologists. That's a little more where my niche is, interestingly enough, because I'm here on the East Coast in the mountains of West Virginia, and everything is a Civil War over here. So if it's not the Civil War, they don't have a lot of use for history, to be
Right.
honest.
That is fair. That is entirely fair. And now, I like the last reflective question.
Mhm.
Have you ever thought to yourself, in your own private thoughts, how different your life would be in two scenarios? One, you didn't pursue your passion in history, or the other one, you still got your degrees, your BA and your MA, but you didn't go down the path that you are right now.
Oh, I think about that all the time. I think about, what if I had never done it? What if I had never gotten my degrees?
Hmm.
And I think about where I was. And I'm going, wow, my life is so different, and this is really cool. This is really cool. If someone would have told me 10, 15 years ago, hey, guess what? You're going to be interviewed on podcasts, you're going to have a YouTube channel, you're going to have your own website, you're going to publish two books, I never would have believed it. Never would have believed it.
I 100% understand the thing. I never thought I would ever do YouTube, but people love the content I'm making. Never thought I would get two books published, and now a third book coming out very soon. But here I am. Never thought I would be a magazine writer, but now I've written
Mhm.
about what is it, 9 pieces for like different magazines. It's incredible. And I've learned, so much from a lot of people, going back to what you said about, connections and taking away everything and applying to my own, which then we arrive at the final question of this incredible interview, Brandy. So,
Mhm.
with everything that you've learned from, sorry, from your peers, friends and family, uh, historians that you've mentioned, archaeologists, anthropologists, everybody, with all the knowledge that you have gotten and still learning, what is your word of wisdom to exiting historians from college, or even people who are interested in history and want to get into this field by any means through different paths? What is your word of wisdom to them?
I think my word of wisdom, especially for people that are just studying history, do not look at history through a modern lens.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, you cannot do that. You have to look at history from the viewpoint of someone of that time period.
Definitely.
Yeah, I had a professor very quickly. I believe it was my undergrad. I was taking the a class. It was taking place during the antebellum years, and he split the class into A through L. You looked at a piece of documentation, and you had to write in favor of abolishing slavery. For the rest of the class, M through Z, you had to look at the same thing, but then write your discussion board in favor of slavery. From the point of view of someone of this time period, with my last name Williams, guess what? I had to write in favor of slavery. Morally, naturally, of course, I don't agree with it, but I had to write about it from the point of view of someone from that time.
Yes, and you actually brought up something that I remember talking with a guest a while ago, which is, the modern lens of history. We always try to think of, how we would approach like history in the past, and like, oh, we wouldn't do that. Like, I'll give an example, but it's very, very true. There was a professor, I forgot his name. He said that if you were, as you were in 1940s Nazi Germany, would you have participated in the roundup of your neighbors who were Jewish? And 9 out of 10 people said, "Oh, I would." And it's like, actually, you would. You would. That's the world you grew up in. And even made it harder. Would you have given up Anne Frank? And everyone said, "No, I wouldn't." It's like, you would, because here's the thing. Even if you had said, "No," look at the history of the families who went through it. They
Mm-hmm.
had to risk everything. And it's really hard reflection, because we cannot look at history through the past, because if we were as we were in those time periods, like the dominance, like Roman Empire, Greece, antebellum South, anything like that, as who we are individuals, it would be vastly different. And even he even said, like, for all the male students in the class who are like of age to join service, if they were participating in, like, again, if they were part of like the Nazi war machine,
Mm-hmm.
they would have done heinous crimes. Horrible to say, but it is true. And he ended saying, I forgot what it was, but paraphrasing, is that until you know the depths of your own monstrosity in like the
Mm-hmm.
history, you don't have the capacity to say, I would have done this because, I'm going to follow my good morals. You don't. You don't know what
Mm-hmm.
good is during that time, because you don't know how evil you would have been at that time as you were. So it is important to
Mm-hmm.
really put history in the context and not try to view it
Yes.
through the modern lens, because it devalues the history and it brings up a messy historiography where you can view history going backwards and make your own timeline, which is ultimately the wrong thing to do.
Yep. Exactly. Exactly.
Yes. And kind of on a very downer and bleak ending, uh, thank you everybody for joining us for another historians interview. I want to give a huge thank you to Brandy for coming on the show. Brandy, thank you so very much. And before we officially end, where can people find and engage with you on social media to reach out, say hi, or subscribe to your blog or YouTube channel?
Traditionallegends.com, and on YouTube, it's also Traditional Legends.
Awesome. Now, where can people find copies of your book if they want to purchase them?
Amazon.com.
Amazon.com. Awesome. I will link all those down below in the description of this video. Thank you all so very much for joining us for another Historians interview. And again, a huge thank you to Brandy Williams for coming on the show. And who knows? I guarantee you this will not be the last time we see Brandy on a show. No, no, no. We may have her again for a Historians Lounge special where Brandy will probably talk to us about, aspects that we've talked about in this interview, the history of the Salem witch trials, or maybe the history and study of vampirism and its cultural context. Who knows? Make sure to follow Brandy on social media, as well as subscribe to her YouTube channel to stay up to date, as well as subscribe to The Wandering Scribe to see new episodes, as well as follow me on Instagram. And as always, make sure to like and subscribe and comment down below what was your favorite part of the interview. And until next time, this has been The Wandering Scribe and The Wandering Quill signing out, wishing you all a wonderful day.